All right, everyone. Welcome back to the H2 podcast. This is Sunday, October 29th, 2023. We're going to be talking about the previous week, what happened with Humble, more or less at the news level rather than the stock level, but we'll take a look at that as well. So let's get into it. First of all, our mission statement: to provide Humble retail investors the latest news, filings, and happenings in the most accurate way possible and without compromise. And a bit of a safe harbor for Andrew and I. We are investors in Humble. We are part of the Humble community on Humble Social and HS2, and we are both passionate about blockchain technology. We are not speaking on behalf of Humble. We are not Humble employees or contractors. We're not insiders. We're not financial advisors, and we're not compensated in any way. Any reproduction of this podcast without explicit permission is prohibited. It is our intellectual property. If you do want to take a clip or anything for YouTube or make a comment or whatever have you, just DM me. Our information is at the end of our podcast. We usually have no problem with it. So let's take a look at the last week. Let me just pull this next slide up. Okay, there we go. From the 22nd to the 27th. Okay, so we didn't have a ton of news last week. It was mainly coming in on Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday, we did have another debt retirement news release. We've talked to Jacob extensively in episodes 1 and 2 about the debt retirement and how these C-class shares come into existence and how we're transferring things. There was also an 8K filing. So we'll touch on that a little bit further and the filing a little bit further because this one's pretty important. From a partner perspective, the AFL did announce the Oregon Black Bears, which I'll go into a bit of a deeper dive on that, and the Washington Wolfpack, which has already been announced. However, they didn't have a name, they didn't have a coach, and they didn't announce the owner. So we'll go into that as well. All right, so taking a look at the price changes and volume, not much happened this week for investors from a price perspective. Last Friday, we ended around 10, and then we closed at 9 this week. We've seen a lot of consolidation over the past 2 weeks, and I would say the volume on the previous week was much higher with almost that stopping candle that we saw, and then volume has kind of slowed down, but we're still in a consolidation period. And we'll touch on consolidation in a moment. Andrew, anything to add from your standpoint? It just seemed like it was very boring, which is okay. It happens in our consolidation period. See if he's able to join again. I know he's having reception issues.
No, I think that we're in consolidation now. I think it's very good. What's being sold is being bought up, and if we keep going sideways like this, I'm pleased until start going up.
Yeah, great. We've touched on these levels before. I think we've bounced off the 7 twice now, and if you remember Jacob's stock twits post, he talked about a double bottom. Looks like we had a bit of rebound on that. A couple weeks ago, and then we're back into consolidation phase going sideways. So something we'd like to touch on a little bit, especially because we're able to present information in this manner. It's not Humble Spaces, so we do have visual aspects and everything on this side. We'd like to go into something that we call more or less a technical tool bag. So when we don't have a lot of content for the week, we can still go into actual information that could help retail investors. So what is consolidation? Well, basically it's going sideways. So it's something that is neither reversing a larger price trend or neither continuing an existing price trend. So when we saw candles going down or up or whatever, just going sideways and having a tight price range is the consolidation. So it's breaking trend, and then what you're looking for is steady support and resistance, and then like a flag continuation pattern. So everything's basically going straight to the right, and we're kind of seeing that between 10 and 8 right now, and until it breaks that through some news or some volume, usually there's a compelling event that happens to either go to the uptrend or the downtrend. So the volatility here seems drastic, especially because, well, you can only increment a certain percentage here. So you're either, like, if you take a look at the last slide there, if you're not going to 0%, you're having differences of between 10 and 20% swings, which can be big for day traders. However, it can be tough if you're down here buying, to have such a wild swing and stomach that. So just keep that in mind. If you have a blue chip stock that is sitting around $100 US or something, and it's just going sideways, the consolidation pattern may be a few percent or points of a percentage rather than these larger swings. They're just happening right now because we're at such a low stock price currently, and it has to have those in increments. So the last feature to look is for a relatively low level of trading volume does not exhibit major spikes. That's pretty much what we've seen from last week compared to the previous week, where we did have some record volume on shares traded, not necessarily on the dollar volume though. So that's this week's technical tool bag. If we do talk about patterns, if we talk about trends, if we talk about volume or whatever have you, we will bring these into the conversation just to try to educate listeners. And you can always hit us up on Humble Social if you have further questions regarding this. Pretty standard stuff. Look into it for yourselves. Andrew, anything to add on that?
Nope, you got it covered.
Perfect. Okay, so getting into the news, I will go a little bit more in depth of the filing, but essentially what's happened is they've exchanged more debt, about $6.5 million more of promissory notes into C shares. So let's see who that was from and where it's going. So Sartori, they're the ones that have agreed to exchange basically their $6.5 million in debt into 8,775 shares of Humble Class C preferred stock. Remember, the C shares, they're not convertible into common shares until 2 years after they've been put into there, and it's or an uplisting happens. So it's a little bit strange on how it's done. Basically, what it's doing is locking up these shares for an extended period of time, and then they're given a fair value after uplist or after a certain period of time as well if uplist doesn't happen. And then it will be converted at 25% of a discount of the share price at that time. So if you were to take the C share convertible shares there to the amount of debt that's been transferred, it's about $740, which is a little bit interesting because the Pacific Line ones were for $1,000. So maybe they're calculating that 25% in there as well. The exchange was completed as part of Humble's efforts to reduce its outstanding debt load as well. So they're basically, as Jacob mentioned last week, they're going after existing debt and convertible notes, and they're converting them into this C class preferred stock and basically making them equity rather than having them liabilities on the balance sheet. So it's an interesting way of doing it. We will have him on again if there's more news surrounding B shares. I know he did mention last week as well that they are approaching some B shareholders to possibly move them into there. So Sartori, if you look at their actual promissory notes, they've been, and this is if you look at the actual filing, this is Brian Foote's father's firm. So there's a bunch of, and I'm missing some values there. Must be a copy paste error, but essentially what these were to keep the lights on and the company going. So even though we've had all this debt consolidation, even though we've stripped down and we, being Humble, even though Humble has stripped down a lot of their operating costs, there's still about a $300,000 burn rate now, but previously it was actually significantly higher, which Brian has worked to bring down. So these are what they call bridge loans. If you look at the actual notes when they were dated, I believe they're in 8Ks. You can go back. The terms are actually extremely good for Humble. They're about 5%, and we know that interest rates are significantly higher now. So they weren't those short-term loans that we've talked about in the past or toxic debt. This was more or less bridge loans that had pretty good rates to get them on to the next step or keep working and keep the lights on to keep going. So having those rolled into the C class and not asking for cash or convertible shares, which would cause significantly more dilution and dumping, they've gone this route, which is quite the vote of confidence. Andrew, anything to add there? I know Sartori's been a topic of discussion, and a lot of the community, way in the past, they haven't done much as of late, except for these smaller loans coming out. But any thoughts on that, or should I just keep going? I'll take silences. Keep going. I know he's in a bad spot right now, so. Okay, so let's take a look at the AFL update. I'm just going to take a sip of water here real quick, protect my voice. Okay, so the AFL, they've announced 2 new teams this week. One was previously announced, but they actually brought on the 2 logos on the left there. So the Wolf, which is the Wolf Pack, the Washington Wolf Pack, and the Oregon Black Bears there. Now, this is from their site. It looks like we have 5 teams left to be released and announced. However, there's some conflicting things here. So I'm not sure if it's going to be 16 teams or 20 teams now that this Champions Indoor Football has been absorbed. So we'll see going forward. I did see a rumor on Twitter or X. It does look like all the teams should be finished announcing by the 16th of November. We'll see if that happens. The person that sort of announces these things, they're not an official account or anything like that, but they do have an extremely good track record. It might actually be beneficial to ask them to come on the podcast to see what their partnership with Humble looks like. So let's get into the teams that are announced and why it's important. So the first one is the Oregon Black Bears. They were announced on the 25th. Really interesting. Kayvon Thibodeau is actually the New York Giants linebacker. He's the 5th overall pick from the 2022 NFL draft. He's the owner. He played in the University of Oregon as well as a linebacker. And I sort of mentioned this last week, where you're having a lot of grassroots folks where they're purchasing teams or owning the teams that are within their their locality, right? So that's pretty cool that we now have an owner of an AFL team that's actually an NFL player who's active. Now the head coach is Chuck Jones. He's got experience for playing indoor football for 11 seasons. They will be playing at the Salem Pavilion Arena, which has a capacity of 5,000, which is on the lower end of the other AFL teams. However, there's no telling what could happen in the future with that. So one last thing to note, the last time the AFL played in Oregon, it was at the Moda Center with the Portland Thunder in 2014-15 and the Portland Steel in 2016. So it's kind of interesting that they were able to pull this team from Portland into this area, which is Salem. And just a quote from Commissioner Lee Hutton, because I like quoting him and they always put in their news releases. There's no better person to lead Oregon Black Bears than a true Oregon star like Kayvon, who understands the fans' insatiable appetite for success. So very cool. I get these updates off the official AFL Twitter handle. They do also do press releases on multiple platforms like YouTube or like Facebook Live for whatever reason. However, I think in the future, as Humble Bees becomes their technology partner, that could change. So we'll see what happens. Okay, moving into the next team, that's the Washington Wolfpack. They were officially announced. There's some interesting things about this one as well. So the owner is Mike Thomas. He's pictured there. I think he's number 6 there. He was the owner of the semi-pro Everett Royals and also their former coach. Their head coach is J.R. Wells. He's a former wide receiver for the Everett Hawks and an offensive coordinator for the Royals. So the Royals is another. It's a semi-pro football, like turf football team. So that's pretty interesting. Their arena is the Angel of the Winds Arena. It's got a capacity of just under 8,200. What's interesting about this is the Wolfpack name was actually chosen using a survey for fans through Google Docs. I would expect things like decisions made in the future to not be in Google Docs for these teams, but there would probably be some functionality on the Humble side for maybe some surveys or if you wanted to say name a mascot or do a special day or something like that. But that's pure speculation on my end. But something interesting that you can do with the power of Humble, like doing polls in these sort of meetings. So the last partner update is they announced a deputy commissioner. It's Mike McCoy. He's the former commissioner of the CIF, or the Champions Indoor Football. He's got 20 plus years in professional sports. This seemed like a no-brainer, especially since the CIF was just absorbed into the AFL. He's worked in 5 other indoor leagues. He's taught sports marketing and sports finance at Wichita State for over 10 years. And his overall role is to guide and grow the league's football operations. So another quote from Lee Hutton, with his extreme background and expertise in arena football, we're confident that he will be a valuable asset to help push the league to new heights. So they're sort of building their front office. We already got a lot of front office announced, but having these experienced people just gives a lot more confidence to the AFL as a partner, in my opinion. So let's take a look at the roster. There's a few new names, more or less, but at the end of the day, the one that was really added this week was the Oregon Black Bears with the capacity of 5,000. So that brings our seating capacity to 92,000 and change. And we do have still at least 5 teams being announced, and I think one of them is possibly a stadium capacity of around 18,000. So that would be a big addition as well. So whether it's 16 teams or 20 teams, currently it's up for debate, but we will find out, it seems like, in the next month on where their locations are and who's leading them. It'd be nice to have some more larger names like Oregon brings, with existing NFL players or bigger names like that. I mean, previous AFL teams had people like Mark Cuban, having teams. So that's interesting. And that's really the update from the Hummel side and the AFL side as well. I'm going to give a bit of a pause, and then I'm going to go to some community spotlight things, and we'll talk a bit about that. Okay, so just a bit of changes that have happened on HS2, but not necessarily a change, but something that's been added, which is pretty cool. There's a first responders group now on Humble Social 2.0. It's only available on HS2. You won't see it on the legacy Humble Social, which I'm sure will be updated eventually. But this is looks like for First responders, I know Eric's a police officer. The other Eric looks to be in the military, and some other folks I saw, nurses and whatnot, that were part of the members. So if you look on your badges on Humble Social, there is a first responder one. So I'm not sure if it's gated or not, but well, maybe I can pull up Eric and he can explain to us who's like what's happening in that group. So that's all the content I have. I'm going to just end it with, if you want to connect with us, you can DM us in HS2. You can tag us. We're the H2 podcast on Humble Social or HS2. We do have a group in there if you want to ask questions, if you have suggestions, and you can also join the H2 podcast group on Humble Social 2.0. We also do have a YouTube. As I did mention, we will post videos there, but within HS2, once we end the recording on this meeting, it should show up there now. That's some new functionality that's been added. And we do have a Twitter. However, I don't know how active we'll be on it. If we're mainly giving updates to Humble shareholders, they should be using HS2 and Humble Social as well. So with that being said, I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to ask